My name is Michael Carter. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business, and you learn early that loyalty is currency. I moved to the city chasing a career in tech, always quiet, always observant, never flashy. I prided myself on being dependable, the friend people could lean on, the son who never caused trouble. I didn't seek attention. I sought trust, and I thought I had it in abundance, until the day I realized how thin it all really was. It happened on Thanksgiving. I pulled up to my parents' house, the crisp, fall air, carrying the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. I stepped up to the front door, a casual smile on my face, expecting the warmth of family. Instead, my parents stopped me before I could even knock. Their expressions were unreadable, a strange mixture of shame and calculation. Then my mother said it, each word deliberate, cutting. "You're not invited. Go home." I froze, my chest tightening, my mind spinning. Behind them, laughter floated from the dining room. I peeked around the corner, and my stomach sank. My sister, the one I'd confided in countless times, sat at the table with my uncle and my so-called best friend. They were leaning in, whispering, then erupting into laughter at something I wasn't a part of. I felt a strange kind of shock, the kind that makes your body feel heavier, like gravity suddenly doubled. I didn't speak. I didn't beg. I just nodded. I turned slowly and walked back to my car, each step measured, controlled. I didn't want them to see the tremor in my hands, the sting in my eyes, the betrayal curling like smoke in my chest. I sat behind the wheel, the engine silent, letting the moment wash over me, cold and sharp. And then, without a word to anyone, I pulled out my phone and made one call that would set a chain of events in motion they would never see coming. 20 minutes later, my phone began to explode with notifications. First texts, then missed calls, then frantic voicemails. I stayed seated, silent, letting them stew in whatever panic was now gripping them. I could hear it, the subtle unraveling of control, the sudden anxiety that replaced their laughter. It was quiet. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to confront them. The moment of betrayal had been theirs. The moment of reckoning was quietly mine. I watched the messages stack up, letting a slow, deliberate calm settle over me. Anger had no place here. Only clarity, only patience. I had learned early that revenge done in haste is just noise, and noise never lasts. But strategy, quiet observation, timing, they last forever. I didn't need to attend the Thanksgiving dinner that wasn't mine. I had already begun turning the tables, and when the time came, they would understand in the most inescapable way exactly what it meant to cross me. After that Thanksgiving, I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the city lights blur past, like fragments of a memory I didn't want to touch. The silence in my car was deliberate, a buffer between the world and the storm that had erupted quietly inside me. I thought about loyalty, about the people I had trusted, about the signs I'd ignored because I wanted to believe in them. Every smile, every shared secret, every laugh now felt like a carefully constructed mask hiding something darker. Betrayal, I realized, was often silent. It crept in under the guise of normalcy until you woke up one day and found yourself standing outside, excluded and humiliated. I replayed that moment over and over. The way my parents' eyes avoided mine, the muffled laughter behind the door, my sister's glance that was too quick, too fleeting to be innocent. Each memory cut in a different way, not with fire or fury, but with a slow, penetrating ache. It was the kind of hurt that lingers in the quiet corners of your mind, whispering reminders of who you were before trust became a weapon against you. And yet, even in that ache, I felt something unexpected, a rising clarity. Anger was useless. It would have clouded every decision. pain was instructive. I realized then that loyalty isn't something you demand, it's something earned and maintained silently, often unnoticed. And if it can be so easily broken, then it had never truly existed. That thought both saddened and empowered me. I understood that my response couldn't be loud, couldn't be dramatic, couldn't feed into their sense of triumph. If I wanted justice, I had to make it subtle, deliberate, and inescapably effective. The best revenge, I knew, is the one that leaves no doubt without ever raising your voice. Sleep became difficult. I would lie awake, tracing every interaction with my sister, my uncle, and my friend. I catalogued their behaviors, their tendencies, the way they underestimated me, the way they assumed silence equaled submission. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a plan began to take shape in my mind. It wasn't about exposing them immediately or making them feel shame for an instant. It was about creating a situation where their own decisions, their own miscalculations, would unravel them entirely, without a single confrontation. In the quiet of those nights, I also confronted myself. Had I been naive? Had I allowed affection and trust to blind me? The answer was yes, and it was liberating to admit it. I no longer needed to hope they would recognize my value or apologize. Recognition wasn't coming, and apologies were irrelevant. What mattered was understanding my own strength, the fact that I could control the outcome, even when others tried to dictate it. That understanding became the quiet heartbeat of my revenge, composed, patient, inevitable. By the time I returned to my apartment, I had stopped feeling like the outsider, the rejected one. I had become the observer, the strategist, the silent force moving pieces they didn't even realize were in play. My betrayal had given me a gift, clarity. I had been handed the map to their weaknesses, their assumptions, their arrogance, and in that clarity, I found a strange serenity. They would not see me fight. They would not see me suffer. They would only witness the precise, intelligent outcome of their own mistakes. The days that followed were methodical. I didn't announce my intentions, and I didn't act impulsively. I observed, I watched the patterns of their lives, the subtle ways they leaned on each other, the assumptions they made about me, and the small cracks that ran through their carefully maintained facades. It became clear that their confidence was built on underestimating me, assuming my silence equaled weakness. That assumption was their greatest mistake. I started cataloging everything: habits, relationships, financial dependencies, the little truths they thought were invisible. Every detail was a thread I could pull when the time came. I learned to speak less and listen more. Every conversation became a tool, every laugh a subtle test of their intentions. They would reveal themselves without realizing it. I noticed my sister brag about insider knowledge at work, my uncle casually exposing financial misjudgments, my friend admitting to secrets that weren't his to share. None of these were confrontations. They were breadcrumbs, and I collected them meticulously. Quietly, I began to understand the leverage I had accumulated. It wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful, the kind of power that grows silently until the moment it's undeniable. Sleep became an ally in my planning. In the dark hours of night, I traced out scenarios, weighing each decision, calculating the responses they would never anticipate. I didn't want chaos. I wanted inevitability. Every conversation, every move became part of a larger pattern, a mosaic of outcomes that would eventually lead them to stumble on their own miscalculations. I didn't crave immediate satisfaction. Patience was essential. Their arrogance had already set the stage for their own undoing. I only had to wait. Even in the midst of this planning, I maintained my outward calm. Friends saw me still quiet, still composed, never a hint of the storm that brewed beneath. I never brought up Thanksgiving, never confronted my sister or my parents directly. They had no idea I was weaving a careful, deliberate counterbalance to their betrayal. They believed they had won, and that was precisely the point. Letting them bask in their false victory made the eventual outcome all the more undeniable. I also began to gather allies, subtly, people they had overlooked or dismissed, those who themselves had been wronged or marginalized. Connections were made quietly, conversations held in casual tones that never raised suspicion. I was building a network that would reinforce my leverage without exposing my hand. Every small alliance strengthened my position, every piece of information a potential domino waiting to fall. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture of the chain reaction I could set into motion. I didn't feel triumphant yet. I felt controlled, centered, and capable. Betrayal had left its mark, yes, but it had also sharpened me, honed my instincts, and clarified the rules of engagement. The stage was set, the pieces aligned, and my silence had become my greatest weapon. When the moment arrived, it would not feel like revenge. It would feel inevitable, precise, and undeniable, a truth they could not escape. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. My sister started noticing small shifts in her own world, though she had no idea why. A project she had assumed was hers alone suddenly faced delays. Contacts she trusted questioned her reliability, and whispers began to circulate that she hadn't accounted for. She looked to my uncle for support, but even he seemed caught off guard by the chain of events. Everything she thought was secure was quietly unraveling, and with each misstep her confidence wavered. I never interfered directly. I simply allowed the dominoes, set in motion by her own arrogance, to fall. My uncle was next. I had quietly documented his financial overextensions, his reliance on short-term gains, and his underestimation of the people around him. One miscalculated move, a loan extended without proper verification, created a ripple he couldn't control. Friends and colleagues began noticing inconsistencies, questioning decisions he thought were ironclad. He called me in panic, seeking advice from someone he assumed was neutral. I remained composed, calm, offering guidance that was measured, precise, and indirectly set to expose the fragility of his own choices. He had no idea the moment was orchestrated not by me but by his own misjudgments. And then there was my friend, the one who had laughed the loudest at Thanksgiving. He began to feel a quiet isolation. Doors he thought were open, gradually closing. Opportunities he assumed were guaranteed began slipping through his fingers. People he had counted on started to reconsider alliances. I didn't speak. I didn't accuse. I didn't taunt. I simply maintained presence and calmness. My silence became a mirror, reflecting the chaos of his own choices back at him in ways he could not ignore. Throughout this, I maintained my composure. No victory dances, no gloating, no petty confrontations. I continued my work, my life, and my quiet personal pursuits. Watching them falter from a distance, while appearing completely uninvolved, carried a satisfaction that anger or confrontation never could. There was elegance in letting truth and consequences act as their own agents of justice. My patience, observation, and quiet strategy had become far more potent than any shouting or dramatic showdown ever could have been. I noticed the panic subtly escalating. My sister's casual confidence gave way to second-guessing. My uncle's bravado was replaced with hurried decisions and sleepless nights. My friend's laughter turned into cautious, measured words in conversation, a nervousness that had never been there before. They were all unraveling, not because I had forced them to, but because the foundation they had built on deception and arrogance could not withstand scrutiny and pressure. I had merely illuminated their weaknesses without touching them. By the time the first month had passed, their control had weakened significantly. What had once been a seemingly untouchable hierarchy of influence, trust, and confidence had shifted imperceptibly to them, decisively to me. I had achieved what I set out to do. The betrayers were losing power, and it wasn't through rage or exposure. It was through quiet, intelligent orchestration, and in that quiet orchestration, I found a strange satisfaction, a subtle but undeniable justice unfolding, orchestrated by patience, observation, and unwavering emotional control. By the second month, the unraveling was unmistakable. My sister, once so self-assured, now moved through her world with hesitation, questioning every decision, every judgment she had taken for granted. Her laughter no longer carried certainty, it carried nervousness. She began to notice doors closing at work and social circles subtly shifting away. Each small loss was magnified in her mind, feeding a quiet panic she couldn't articulate, and yet I never spoke, never intervened, never gloated. My silence allowed the consequences to speak for themselves, and it was far more effective than any confrontation could have been. My uncle's situation worsened in ways I had predicted, but he had not. Minor financial missteps escalated, alliances he had assumed solid crumbled, and advisors began questioning his judgment. He called for meetings, sought counsel, and scoured for solutions. But every move only revealed another weakness he hadn't noticed. I watched quietly, offering nothing, intervening in no direct way. The collapse was his own doing. My part was simply understanding the map of his errors and letting it guide the natural fallout. Every miscalculation, every blind spot he had ignored, became an instrument of his undoing. And my so-called best friend, the one whose laughter had stung the most, was the most striking example of quiet justice. His network, once robust, began to contract. People he had manipulated or underestimated withdrew subtly, almost imperceptibly, leaving him isolated and anxious. He tried to reclaim control, reaching out to others, manipulating situations as he always had, but his efforts only amplified the instability he had created. I observed with steady calm, noting the irony that every misstep he had taken to assert dominance now reinforced his downfall. Silence had become my ally, patience my strategy, and inevitability my weapon. None of this involved accusations or dramatics. I never confronted them about Thanksgiving, never relived the betrayal, never forced recognition. They were collapsing under the weight of their own choices, and that truth carried a satisfaction I could never have achieved through words alone. It was quiet, methodical, and above all intelligent, a justice so subtle it left no room for denials or excuses. They were learning, slowly and painfully, that underestimating someone doesn't go unnoticed, and that betrayal always carries its own cost. In the midst of their unraveling, I felt a shift within myself as well. I realized that revenge, when executed with intelligence and patience, is not about spectacle. It's about reclaiming your power, your composure, and your peace of mind. I was no longer the hurt party. I was the observer, the strategist, the person who could move through life with clarity while they floundered in chaos. The sense of empowerment wasn't fleeting or petty. It was a deep, lasting calm that came from knowing I had acted with precision and self-respect. By the end of this stage, the atmosphere had completely changed. Where once there had been arrogance, control, and laughter at my expense, there was now hesitation, uncertainty, and quiet fear. The power they had wielded so carelessly had dissipated, replaced by a precarious instability they couldn't seem to rectify. And all the while, I maintained composure, never raising my voice, never expressing anger, never needing to prove anything. Their downfall was complete, silent, and inevitable, the truest form of justice, one that left me entirely free from their shadows. In the quiet aftermath, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The tension that had been coiled in my chest for weeks began to loosen, replaced by a calm that felt almost foreign. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful anymore. I felt liberated. Watching them unravel had been satisfying, yes, but the true victory was internal. The knowledge that I had acted with precision, patience, and dignity while preserving my own integrity. Silence had been my ally, and now, finally, I could embrace the peace it had brought me. I reflected on what I had learned about loyalty and trust. Betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been illuminating. I saw clearly who was capable of integrity and who was not, and I no longer wasted energy hoping for recognition or apology. That clarity freed me from the chains of resentment, allowing me to focus on rebuilding myself, nurturing relationships that mattered, and excelling in areas I had neglected while consumed by the shock of their betrayal. Rebuilding wasn't loud or flashy. It was deliberate and steady. I poured energy into my career, into passions that had been put on hold, and into creating an environment where my trust was not abused. Friends who truly valued me became closer, and those who had only served convenience drifted away without struggle. I realized that personal growth often follows betrayal, and the most profound victories are the ones that leave you stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. Their presence became a faint echo rather than a looming shadow. They had lost the power to affect me because I had reclaimed my narrative. The same people who had laughed at me, who had dismissed my loyalty, could now witness my life moving forward, composed, successful, and calm. I didn't need to prove anything to them. My life itself became the quiet testament to resilience and strategy. Theirs was a collapse I hadn't caused with rage, but they could see its consequences in every choice I made from that point on. I found joy in small, simple moments that had previously gone unnoticed. Mornings spent in quiet reflection, evenings dedicated to learning and creation, the satisfaction of achieving goals on my own terms, all of it grounded me. I realized that true revenge is never about spectacle or humiliation. It's about regaining your own life, untangling yourself from those who sought to diminish you, and moving forward with intentionality. The calm I had cultivated became my greatest asset, and freedom my most rewarding victory. Over time, I stopped even thinking about the Thanksgiving betrayal in a way that hurt me. It became a story of growth, a reminder that betrayal, while painful, can be the catalyst for extraordinary clarity and strength. I understood that some people are not meant to walk beside you, and that the most powerful response is measured, intelligent, and completely contained within yourself. That realization became a foundation I could rely on, stronger than anger, sharper than revenge, and more liberating than any confrontation could ever be. I ended this chapter of my life with a sense of quiet triumph. The weight of resentment had been lifted, replaced with wisdom, composure, and a profound sense of control. I had navigated betrayal not with fury, but with patience, not with confrontation, but with strategy, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my peace, my dignity, and my freedom. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and the life I chose to build in the wake of their choices. I had won without a word, and the victory was absolute. Life began to take on a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. The chaos that had once consumed me was replaced with deliberate movement, each decision made with calm, almost surgical precision. I noticed details I had previously overlooked, the way people carried themselves, the subtle signals that indicated intent, the quiet power of patience. I began to apply these lessons not just in personal life, but in every interaction, every project, and every opportunity. My perspective had sharpened. Betrayal had been a teacher, and I was determined to honor its lessons with mastery. I started noticing the subtle consequences of my former betrayer's actions in ways I hadn't anticipated. My sister's arrogance continued to lead her into small but significant professional missteps, each one slowly eroding the respect she thought she commanded. My uncle's financial decisions became increasingly unstable, and the network of influence he had relied upon for decades began to fracture without any direct interference from me. Even my former friend's social standing suffered quietly, invitations dwindled, partnerships faltered, and trust evaporated. I observed it all like a careful scholar, noting how cause and effect always outpace emotion when left unhurried. Every encounter with them became a silent affirmation of my own strategy. Their attempts to assert dominance or maintain appearances were undermined, not by confrontation, but by the natural fallout of their prior choices. It was fascinating to watch the unrelenting logic of consequences unfold in real time. They had thought I was powerless because I had remained quiet, but that quiet had been deliberate, a calculated reserve that allowed the truth of their actions to unravel itself. It was a victory not just of patience, but of understanding the intricate mechanics of human behavior. During this period, I also reconnected with myself in ways I had neglected. Time, that had previously been consumed by trust and disappointment, became a resource for growth. I cultivated skills, explored interests, and strengthened relationships with those who demonstrated sincerity and loyalty. The calm control I had fostered over the chaos in their lives extended to my own, and I began to see opportunities I had once ignored. The betrayal no longer defined me, it had refined me, leaving me more perceptive, resilient, and prepared for any future challenge. One quiet evening, I reflected on how differently life could have played out. A single moment of betrayal had once left me stunned, isolated, and questioning every connection I had. Now that same moment had become the fulcrum upon which my life pivoted. I could move with clarity, with patience, and with a level of emotional intelligence that few would ever comprehend. It was not revenge in the way stories often depict, shouts, exposure, or humiliation. It was a transformation, a complete reclamation of self through strategy and composure. By the end of this month, I realized the most satisfying victories are the ones that leave no trace of the struggle, no evidence of manipulation, no room for argument. My peace, my clarity, and my quiet dominance were invisible but undeniable. They could see the ripple effects of their own miscalculations, and I could see the wisdom of restraint reflected in my own life. I had learned that silence, patience, and observation are not passive. They are powerful tools, capable of reshaping outcomes without ever needing to raise your voice or compromise your dignity. I began to realize the full potential of the leverage I had quietly accumulated. Every detail I had observed, every weakness I had catalogued, every misstep they had made could now be used to influence outcomes without ever showing my hand. I didn't need confrontation or accusation. The world itself would reflect the consequences of their arrogance. My power had become subtle, almost invisible, yet absolute. They were still blind to it, and that was exactly how it should be. True control, I realized, is never about spectacle. It is the quiet awareness that you shape the environment without being noticed. I started making small moves in my own life that, while seemingly ordinary, had ripple effects for them. A recommendation here, a connection there, a timely word to someone they relied on, all executed with casual precision. None of it felt vengeful. It felt natural, as though the universe itself was aligning. Yet each action had an impact that compounded in ways they could not anticipate. Slowly, the structures they had built, the assumptions of influence, control, and loyalty, began to weaken further, guided by invisible forces they never suspected were me. Even my former friend, the one who had laughed that Thanksgiving, started to experience subtle shifts in his social circle. Invitations declined, partnerships stalled, and whispers of doubt circulated without any direct instigation on my part. He could not understand why doors closed. All he knew was a growing unease, a creeping realization that control was slipping through his fingers. I remained calm and composed in every interaction, careful to appear unaffected. The irony was profound. His own ambition and deceit were the instruments of his decline, and my silence magnified the effect. My sister, too, began to confront the invisible friction in her professional and personal life. Decisions she once made effortlessly now required caution, and even small errors seemed to carry disproportionate consequences. She tried to assert authority, to manipulate outcomes, to regain her footing, but every attempt was subtly undermined, sometimes by chance, sometimes by the structures I had patiently positioned. The beauty of it was in the subtlety. Nothing I did could be traced to me, yet every domino falling was a reflection of the quiet power I had claimed. I began to feel a profound sense of mastery over life itself. Watching these subtle consequences unfold required patience, observation, and strategic thought, and it reinforced the lesson I had learned from betrayal. The strongest victories are measured, composed, and internal. I no longer felt anger or resentment. I felt control, clarity, and an unshakable calm. My life, once temporarily fractured by betrayal, was now aligning in ways I had deliberately orchestrated, a symphony of cause and effect played entirely on my terms. Evenings became a time for reflection rather than plotting. I considered how the quiet orchestration of consequences could be applied in other areas of life: work, relationships, personal growth. I realized that strategy and patience were far more effective than confrontation and emotion. They were universal tools, and their power was magnified by silence. As I sat in that quiet reflection, I understood something fundamental. Revenge is not about harming others. It is about reclaiming your own narrative, your own peace, and your own freedom, and letting consequences naturally manifest. By this stage, the pattern of unraveling had become undeniable. Each of them, my sister, my uncle, my former friend, moved through life cautiously, constantly second-guessing themselves, unsure of what misstep would bring further consequences. I watched from a distance, never interfering directly, never needing to gloat. The most satisfying part was that their downfall had become self-perpetuating. The small errors they made compounded, fueled by anxiety and overcorrection, while I maintained perfect composure, moving forward in my own life with quiet certainty. I also began to notice the liberation in my own movements. Without the weight of their manipulation, my focus sharpened. I could pursue opportunities that had once been clouded by doubt or distraction. Relationships that truly mattered flourished, grounded in mutual respect rather than convenience. My perspective shifted. Betrayal had been painful, but it had been an instructor of immense value. I had learned the discipline of patience, the potency of silence, and the deep, enduring power of observing rather than reacting. Their confidence continued to erode. My sister struggled to assert herself in situations she had previously dominated, often deferring to others, hesitant to act. My uncle faced subtle yet significant resistance from associates who once obeyed without question. And my former friend, increasingly isolated, made desperate moves that only accelerated his decline. It was remarkable to observe, in precise detail, how arrogance and betrayal often carry seeds of self-destruction, seeds that patience, strategy, and calm can allow to flourish naturally. I realized something essential about power. It is not demonstrated in noise or fury. It is exercised in the ability to remain unaffected while life shifts around you. I could see clearly that my former betrayers were no longer shaping my world. They were shaping their own downfall. That realization brought an almost meditative peace. There was no satisfaction in spectacle, no pleasure in anger. The real victory was living fully, moving gracefully and letting consequences act as their own agent. At the same time, I began building for my long-term independence. I invested in myself, skills, knowledge, and personal projects that had previously been delayed. Every move I made was deliberate, reinforcing stability, growth, and resilience. The contrast between my calm, forward-moving life and their anxious, faltering actions was stark. While they floundered in the chaos of their own making, I cultivated strength and opportunity in quiet, deliberate ways. Most importantly, I reclaimed my emotional narrative. Betrayal no longer defined me. It had become a catalyst for growth and empowerment. My peace, composure, and clarity were my greatest assets. I had learned that silence is stronger than confrontation, patience stronger than anger, and foresight stronger than impulsive action. And in this long-term observation, I realized that freedom is the ultimate form of revenge. Freedom from pain, manipulation, and unnecessary entanglement. The months that followed were a study in contrast. My life, once shadowed by betrayal, moved forward with deliberate ease. Opportunities I had long delayed were now within reach. Nurtured quietly and pursued with focus, my days were filled with meaningful work, enriching connections, and small but profound victories that reinforced my independence. Meanwhile, the consequences of their arrogance continued to ripple outward. My sister hesitated at moments she once commanded. My uncle faced obstacles in decisions that had always seemed routine. My former friend fumbled with opportunities he once believed were assured. I began to notice how others responded to the subtle fractures in their world. Colleagues questioned choices that had previously gone questioned. Associates withdrew support from alliances that had once seemed solid, and social networks quietly shifted. All of these shifts, imperceptible at first, accumulated into a cascade of instability they could neither predict nor control. I watched without interference, a calm observer of cause and effect, recognizing the quiet power that comes from understanding human behavior and letting it act without direct intervention. It was fascinating to observe the psychological toll on them. Anxiety replaced arrogance, doubt replaced confidence, and every decision became a potential source of further destabilization. My silence amplified their awareness of fragility, and my calm reinforced my own strength. There was no need to confront, no need to prove, no need to declare a victory. Every misstep they made, every fracture in their world, was a confirmation of my foresight and patience. I had learned that true mastery is invisible. It is the quiet orchestration of outcomes without ever showing your hand. At the same time, I felt a profound sense of personal liberation. The burden of betrayal had transformed into a source of empowerment. I no longer measured myself against their actions or allowed their choices to disrupt my emotional equilibrium. Each day became a demonstration of control, patience, and focus. I was living proof that the most significant victories are not witnessed by others. They are felt by the one who moves forward unshaken, while the chaos of others quietly collapses around them. I began to embrace opportunities for long-term growth that I had ignored while consumed by betrayal. Financial decisions, personal projects, and skill development became areas where I could fully exercise my autonomy and intelligence. Each successful endeavor reinforced the lesson that true power resides not in confrontation or retaliation, but in the meticulous cultivation of one's own life, clarity, and strategy. My former betrayers were collateral in this process. They continued to stumble, and I continued to grow. By the end of this phase, the contrast between our lives could not have been clearer. My calm, composed, and steadily advancing existence stood in stark relief against the anxiety, mistakes, and faltering control of those who had once betrayed me. It was a quiet triumph, one without drama or spectacle, yet entirely undeniable. I had moved through betrayal with intelligence, strategy, and patience, and the results spoke louder than any words ever could. Peace and freedom were mine, and that quiet victory resonated deeper than any moment of revenge could. By now, the trajectory of their lives had shifted so subtly, yet so decisively, that it was impossible to ignore. My sister, once brimming with confidence, hesitated in every decision, second-guessing herself even in minor matters. My uncle faced repeated setbacks, and the ripple effects of previous errors made each day feel like a balancing act on thin ice. My former friend's isolation had grown pronounced. Invitations stopped coming, opportunities vanished, and he began to rely on outdated connections that no longer offered support. Each of these developments occurred without me speaking a single word. My influence was silent, invisible, and absolute. I began to notice a deeper shift within myself as well. With each day of patience and quiet observation, my confidence strengthened. I no longer reacted emotionally to the memory of betrayal. I moved with precision, clarity, and purpose. Life itself felt like a canvas, and I held the brush. The lessons learned through betrayal, patience, subtlety, and strategic foresight became part of my identity, shaping my actions in ways both large and small. I was no longer defined by their choices or my hurt. I was defined by the deliberate life I was constructing from the ashes of their arrogance. At work, in social situations, and even in casual encounters, my calm control became a quiet magnet. Opportunities flowed naturally toward me, connections solidified without effort, and my reputation strengthened, unburdened by drama. In contrast, my former betrayers floundered in instability. Their miscalculations compounded, revealing the limits of reliance on manipulation and the fragility of unchecked ego. I didn't have to push or intervene. The structure of consequences I had allowed to unfold did the work entirely. There was a satisfaction in witnessing the culmination of quiet strategy. It wasn't joy born of cruelty, but a calm acknowledgement of inevitability. Their collapse was the result of patterns I had meticulously observed and allowed to continue, an elegant proof that patience and intelligence often outweigh anger and haste. They struggled to understand the shifts in their lives, unable to trace the subtle orchestration that had guided events so decisively, and in that ignorance, my power remained absolute and undetected. In this period, I also cultivated a sense of gratitude. Betrayal, while painful, had been transformative. It revealed weaknesses, illuminated blind spots, and gifted me an unmatched clarity about human nature, relationships, and the importance of maintaining composure in the face of deceit. The very experience that had threatened to destabilize me had instead become a foundation for unparalleled growth, teaching lessons that would guide the rest of my life with precision and self-assurance. By the close of this chapter, I had fully internalized the quiet but undeniable truth. True victory is not measured by confrontation, loud justice, or the suffering of others. It is measured by reclaiming your life, maintaining composure, and allowing consequences to act naturally. I had accomplished that. They had fallen into the natural results of their own arrogance and betrayal, and I had not lifted a hand. Peace, clarity, and freedom were mine, and the calm that accompanied them was deeper than any fleeting triumph. The months turned into years, and the echoes of betrayal faded into quiet memory, leaving only lessons and clarity behind. I no longer carried the weight of resentment. It had been replaced by deliberate calm and a profound sense of self-reliance. My days were full, balanced, and purposeful, defined by personal growth rather than the failures of others. The people who had once underestimated me were now distant figures, their actions no longer capable of influencing my world. The sense of liberation was complete, a freedom born not from confrontation, but from the patient unfolding of consequences. I reflected often on how subtly life had shifted. My sister's hesitancy, my uncle's faltering authority, my former friend's isolation, all had persisted, leaving a landscape shaped by their own decisions. Observing this from afar, I realized that the quiet orchestration of events had created a justice so elegant that it required no acknowledgement from them. It was a victory that belonged entirely to me, internal and absolute. I had moved beyond the temptation to prove a point. The proof existed naturally in every ripple of their unraveling, visible only to those who had the patience to notice. During this time, I focused on rebuilding and enriching my personal and professional life. Projects I had deferred were completed with excellence, relationships grounded in sincerity were strengthened, and new opportunities emerged as a natural consequence of my composed and deliberate actions. The calm control I exercised became both a personal anchor and a magnet for success. In every corner of my life, I could see the results of patience, observation, and strategy translating into tangible progress and stability. The sense of empowerment I experienced was profound. I no longer needed validation, recognition, or revenge in any traditional sense. The betrayal had been transformed into mastery, the mastery of self, of perception, and of timing. I understood, more than ever, that power is not in the confrontation, but in the quiet accumulation of leverage, patience, and strategic movement. Every success, every achievement, every moment of serenity was evidence of that mastery. I also found joy in teaching myself the art of emotional resilience. No longer reactive, I had cultivated the ability to observe without attachment, to act without need, and to remain composed in the face of unexpected challenges. Life became an extension of careful strategy, each day a canvas where patience and deliberate choice shaped outcomes more effectively than any overt effort or impulsive action ever could. This mastery was not just professional, it was deeply personal, touching every aspect of my existence. As I looked back, I realized that the betrayal, which had once felt like a devastating fracture in my life, had become a defining catalyst. It forced me to develop skills, patience, and emotional intelligence that I may never have cultivated otherwise. I had transformed a moment of profound hurt into years of personal growth, strategic insight, and freedom. I understood now that silence, composure, and careful observation are among the most powerful instruments in human life, and the most satisfying victories are those that require no acknowledgement from anyone else. I woke one morning with a clarity that I hadn't felt in years. The weight of betrayal, the echoes of laughter, the sting of exclusion, they no longer had a place in my mind or in my life. The people who had once caused me pain were shadows fading quietly into the background while I moved forward, fully present, fully empowered. It wasn't triumph in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, the complete reclaiming of myself, my peace, and my trajectory. I realized at last that true victory had never been about them. It had always been about me. Freedom, I discovered, is not granted. It is earned, quietly and deliberately. I had earned mine through patience, through observation, through the careful orchestration of consequences without ever letting anger dictate my action. Each step, each choice, had been calculated to reclaim control over my own life, while allowing the natural course of justice to unfold. The sense of mastery that came from this was profound. I moved through my days with calm authority, understanding that my silence had spoken louder than any confrontation could. I looked at my relationships and my work, and saw growth, stability, and respect, all of which had been cultivated in the shadow of betrayal. The lessons I had learned were no longer theoretical. They were woven into the very fabric of my being. I trusted less blindly, but loved more intentionally. I measured my words, but acted decisively. I had become, in essence, the version of myself I had longed to be, composed, wise, and unshakable. Betrayal had been the forge, and patience had been the fire. Every so often, I heard whispers or glimpsed signs of the subtle chaos my former betrayers still endured. It was never personal anymore. It was simply the natural unfolding of the choices they had made. I took no joy in their discomfort, only a quiet acknowledgement that the world balances itself if you have the patience to observe. Their downfall was not my doing. It was the inevitable result of their own arrogance, and that truth gave me a peace far more satisfying than any revenge could have offered. I spent more time cultivating life than observing others. Projects, friendships, experiences, all were infused with intention and clarity. The shadow of betrayal no longer guided my actions or defined my expectations. I had learned that control over one's own life is the most profound form of victory, and that it is far more powerful than anger, confrontation, or retribution. I carried this lesson into every decision, every relationship, and every endeavor, and it transformed the trajectory of my life completely. And finally, I embraced a kind of serenity I had never known. I was free not because they had fallen, but because I had risen, rising in composure, in strategy, and in self-possession. The story of betrayal, which had once threatened to fracture my spirit, had become the foundation of my independence. I moved forward with clarity, confidence, and quiet strength, knowing that the peace I had earned was unassailable, unshakable, and entirely mine. In the end, I understood the true meaning of closure. It is not confrontation, not exposure, and not revenge. It is the reclamation of your life, your dignity, and your peace. It is the calm awareness that you are no longer tethered to the pain of others' choices. And as I walked forward, fully free and fully myself, I realized that I had achieved something far greater than vengeance. I had achieved life, lived with intention, intelligence, and absolute freedom.